Now we're going to dive into a specific industry, automotive, one that we all know and love generally. And we've got, again, two incredibly knowledgeable experts on stage, so kudos again to Micron for that. Next to me is Simon Euringer, who runs all of BMW's research in the United States, and a lot of it involves AI. BMW is a company that has been pretty ahead of the curve in terms of automation in the vehicle, so we'll hear a lot about that. And then Vijay Nadkarni, who is with Visteon, and he is vice president for AI, so he is the guy at Visteon who thinks about AI, Visteon being one of the largest, as they call them, tier one auto parts? Is that
suppliers?
Suppliers. I don't know, parts is actually not even a word that works anymore, but Visteon is huge, and their products go in how many different manufacturers?
Oh, we have about 25 OEMs around the world that we supply
25
to.
car makers around the world use Visteon stuff. So, well, why don't we start with you, Vijay? When you're the vice president for AI, so what does that mean for a supplier of components to cars and vehicles?
So what we basically do is there are two main things in the industry that automakers are after. One is autonomous driving, which is a big thing happening. And the second actually is infotainment. The use cases for the two are very different. In autonomous driving, we essentially offer the automakers the ability to build cars, and we supply them essentially the mechanism by which the cars will be able to navigate by themselves. We do it at different levels. In infotainment, the idea is to basically give the driver a better experience in the car. And that experience can be by way of learning the driver's profile and making recommendations. Or it could be maybe something a little simpler, as in improving the driver's productivity. But essentially, that is what we offer the OEMs, so that they can offer that to the customers and give the customers a reason to buy more cars or get a better experience in their cars.
I mean, when you're talking to these multiple car makers around the world in all the major countries, do they see AI as a competitive differentiator, do you think, as they compete with other automakers?
Yes, I think so, because AI essentially brings a new dimension to the way the automakers or the OEMs have been building cars in the past. It really allows, first of all, it allows an entirely new set of features, but it also makes existing features a whole lot better. For example, many cars have adaptive cruise control that is not AI, but when you have AI-based adaptive cruise control, it is a clear step ahead. So both in terms of the existing features and the new things, we offer essentially something compelling to the automakers.
Okay, so, I mean, we've sometimes hear it said, I think, that cars are becoming computers on wheels. Does that seem to be excessive, or is that a reasonable way to think about where we're headed?
Well, certainly the cars are becoming computers on wheels. They have been computers on wheels for a while, actually, although the computers are getting more and more sophisticated now with AI and actually even with other technologies. But essentially, these computers have to be trained to do the AI capabilities efficiently and well. AI can also, if it's not trained properly, it can create a lot of mischief as well. And so we have to be very careful with how we introduce AI, and we don't want to introduce it prematurely. So we have to really make sure that whatever AI we put in the vehicle is tested thoroughly, and that it goes through a certain, I would say, period of baking or refinement before it really makes its way to the end user.
Yeah, if they make a mistake with Alexa, it's not as serious as if you guys make
a mistake with an autonomous car can kill people. It's a perfect killing machine.
We don't want that. So Simon, talk about BMW's thinking on AI as a phenomenon.
Well, as a phenomenon, we have it incorporated already in the vehicle with voice assistants, of which we have already also announced our own now. but having integrated all of the usual voice assistants that you might have. So that is typically something where you would expect a car maker to do an integrative part, and so that is already there.
So Alexa, Siri,
Google Assistant,
they're all integrated into
in
your
the car and available since a couple of times, either inside out from within the car to the outside, or outside in from your home to check whether the car is locked. And also there is their own assistant. So that has arrived in the infotainment portion that you mentioned. Now, obviously, also in the AV portion, in the autonomous driving portion, AI is a big part of it, but not everything is AI-based, obviously. So there is a behavioral portion in all of the things that a car will do to take you from one place to another, or a car that takes up time to find a parking space, right? There's a behavioral portion that you would expect to be as smart as possible and as convenient to whatever your style is as possible. And then there is a non-behavioral part of the vehicle that you would like to never change, like the shape, the smell, the look of the car, right? That you would expect the vehicle to stay like it is. And so AI is there, but AI is not everything. So it's like the integration and how intelligently can it come together. That's really what drives us, and in terms of engineering question, keeps us busy.
Well, one of the things you mentioned is the style that each of us have, our own very, idiosyncratic preferences.
Yes.
And that probably is something you have to factor in both for the autonomy features of the driving of the vehicle as well as the infotainment, right? So is that where a lot of the AI is going to come in, is adapting to what an individual actually wants?
Exactly, because look at the behavioral aspect of driving, right? We are probably not all driving the same way, right? Defensive, aggressive, and all, and also not within our daily day, right? We're potentially driving differently depending on our mood.
Yeah.
This is what exactly you would expect from a vehicle that drives you, right? So the behavioral portion has to be AI-based in order to be convenient, because you wouldn't expect, let's say, a BMW drive style in all of the situations that you will be driven, right? Because you might not be in the mood for that particular sporty or whatever fuel-efficient drive style, because your behavior is changed, and your preferences will change. And so all the behavioral portions of anything we solve computationally is to be AI-based and to be adaptive to mood, to situations, to context.
Yeah, well, situations. So Vijay, mood is one thing, but different trips are for different purposes and will be done in different ways. And does AI enter into that too?
Oh, absolutely, because AI does one thing that's very important, which is it allows the car to learn, adapt to different drivers and their personalities, their behavioral profile, and so on. And very often, for example, let's take infotainment, because that's a simple. There are better use cases for that. But the car can actually learn about a person's habits in the car, and also the points of stoppage of the car. And from that, the car can essentially learn what the driver likes to do at different times of the day, in different weather conditions, as to when they fill gas, what restaurants they like to go to. All of these become individual nuggets of the driver's behavior. And these individual nuggets are then essentially sent to the AI learning engine. And the AI learning engine can then have the repository. And following that, when of course, it'll keep learning on an ongoing basis. But then as the car makes more and more trips, it'll find itself in situations or scenarios where the driver could benefit from a recommendation, for instance. And the recommendation can be tied directly to the profile that a car has learned about that driver. For example, I give you one simple use case. Let's take something as simple as just filling up gas. Okay, the car can learn that the fuel is running low. You don't need AI for that. It just knows that directly from the CAN bus. But the car could learn whether the driver likes to refuel at the start of a trip, at the end of a trip, what brand gas station the driver likes. Some drivers like to refuel when the gas tank is exactly at, say, 10% or 5%. All of these are things that a car can learn about a driver, and then the recommendation that it makes to the driver about a gas station will match those recommendations, not just that the gas tank is running low.
Now, is that kind of inference and calculation a specific functional part of the car? In other words, there's a lot of different parts of the car where AI is playing a role, right?
Sure.
Is there going to be sort of a personalization engine which is part of every vehicle, in effect?
Well, it'll differ for the type of system that you're talking about. What we would use for autonomous driving will typically not be the one that we will use for infotainment.
Right.
And the two, in fact, will, at least for now.
So there could be two personalization.
Right. There'll be what we call ECUs, but they're basically computing engines that will essentially serve the purpose of what a car wants to do with that thing. So for infotainment, what we would typically have is a personalization engine that is really dedicated for infotainment, and for autonomous driving, we would have a personalization engine that is dedicated for autonomous driving.
Right. So I want to get into autonomous driving, self-driving in some detail in a minute. But Simon, how many different kinds of AI would you say there will be, or there are in a, well, let's say are and will be in a specific car?
Well, in the car, I think we can agree that the infotainment portion and the AV portion is one of them. Obviously, also all chassis-based control functions can benefit, right, from taking AI-based learning approach. I think where we see more and more is the outside-in portion. So every app or every system that you use that connects with the car, whether it's in a fleet management, for example, when you want the car to pull up to you, or any use cases where you are not part of the driving vehicle, right? A use case where a car parks itself, right? So this is going to be one typical example. You drop off the car here at the venue and the car will park itself. That is going to happen, and that has to be that can be solved very elegantly or not very elegantly. And I think this is one of the portions where we see AI as the major driver. This is not a rule-based thing,
so to speak, right? So in other words, I mean, could there be AI in the braking system, AI in the pollution management system, AI in the vision system? I mean, or is that ultimately going to be one networked AI in the vehicle, or is that not the right question?
Well, there is a number of use cases in a vehicle that will not benefit from AI. Purely deterministic pieces of software that are just like state machines that happen to be part of the systems that we interact with. And also in a driving policy, when there are obvious situations on the road, you're about to hit an object within the next second, there is another lot of AI you need.
You don't need, that's what you mean by deterministic. If there's an object in the road, stop. That's an if then.
That's pretty simple. So there are situations where it's pretty evident that AI will not help the situation.
Right.
But there are a ton of situations and ton of use cases in the vehicle where AI, again, any behavioral aspect, like in-cabin control, especially when the driver is freed up of the task of actually piloting the vehicle, then we want maximum driver distraction or sleep or entertainment or productivity. And that is obviously where AI can help a lot.
Okay, before we get to the autonomy, I know one of the things you've thought a lot about is this issue of productivity. Mm-hmm. So talk about what Visteon's thinking about that and what it may be like riding in a car in the relatively near future.
Sure. So productivity is very simple. Typically when I commute to work or back home, of course I'm listening to music or the news or something like that. But in my head, I would be rather maybe getting some work done during that time. So basically, the concept is that we can do a few things that we would normally do at our desk, but now we can try to bring them into the car. A simple case is making phone calls, taking an appointment. We all have calendars, and they typically have invites that with phone numbers. So using AI, what we can do is essentially read the person's invite. Now, that is already being done, but where AI comes in is it can determine whether a particular invite has a phone number. We need to be able to distinguish the phone number to call from, say, a phone number that might be in the signature block of that invite. So that is one thing that AI can essentially do. It can distinguish between, say, a phone number from a conference bridge. In certain cases, the conference bridge may have a leader pin. So AI can essentially separate out all of these. In certain cases, the invite may not even have a phone number, but it may be a situation where there is no phone number, but it is with a person. And if the car is moving at a certain point, then the AI system can infer that the appointment is at a remote location. And if the person is running late for the appointment, it can determine that by itself and then allow the person to make a look-ahead call or an advance call to the destination party. All of these are things which are basically possible, and all of these basically improve the productivity in the car. And that's with invites. The other aspect of this is simply text messages or emails. Very often, I mean, you all get text messages, and some of us sneak a peek, and more than that, we even respond, which we should not be doing. But in this, what can be done is the AI can intercept incoming text messages and display them in the head-up display. Or the same thing with emails. It can essentially intercept emails and then essentially on the head-up display or on the cluster, show the sender name, the caption of the email, the subject, and then maybe the first line or first two lines, things like that.
So one thing that confuses me when I hear examples like that is what will be done by the car and what will be done by other systems. I mean, for example, the phone itself might be able to detect that you're in the car and do an awful lot of what you said. And of course, Apple has CarPlay and can automatically integrate with the car already. So how do you figure when you're thinking about planning future cars, whether it's going to be the phone and the systems that come from a company like Google or Apple or Amazon that will be doing this work, or will it be the systems that are developed by the car maker? Is that get fuzzy and is that uncertain?
So what we are seeing is something quite interesting, which is that in the OEM world, not everybody is going after Google, or in certain cases, I think what we're seeing is that there are OEMs who definitely want to go the route of Google. And in some cases, there are OEMs who may not necessarily want to go with Google or with Apple. And the reason is they essentially want to maybe at least keep some level of engagement or I would say the account control over the user to themselves. And because of this, the level of functionality that you see in CarPlay is limited. For example, I don't know how many of you know, but CarPlay doesn't let you download any app you want. You can only download it only comes with about 10 to 12 apps right now. And you can, let's say you want to download Evernote. Okay, it's a very popular app on the mobile phone, but in a car, you cannot get it. Okay, so there are things like this which are imposed by the OEMs, and for companies that essentially are maybe less anxious to get after Google, this could be an alternative.
Okay, of course, what Apple and Google and Amazon decide they want to do with their devices will evolve over time. And you obviously have kind of at BMW made your bet. If you told us just now that you've got your own voice assistant, right?
Yes.
So you're basically going head to head with Google and Apple in a certain sense. Is that a fair statement?
We are augmenting in a field where those assistants wouldn't go. So we are not shielding anything. Essentially, we have had Alexa in the car way before we had our own assistant. So we are totally aware that for many of the infotainment aspects, we will not be the OEM of those functions.
Okay.
Right? So a voice assistant that does so many things in your life will never come from a car brand. That's
so why do you need a voice assistant then?
Because our voice assistant can augment in all of those things, in all of those situations where you have the contextual benefits of the situation you're in, right? And so basically any basic interaction with the vehicle, right? Like warmer, colder, any type of, everything you can do with a control today can be done over voice. That's not what is in the main focus of an Alexa. And that's what an Alexa cannot do today, also because of all the proprietary systems.
So-
Also, questions like, okay, where is the washer wiper fluid, whatever. Any type of question or interaction that you would have with the vehicle will be augmented by the own assistant. And it will also seamlessly hand over to other assistants if you like so.
So if you're in the driver's seat and you're in a car of the type you just described, so you'll say Alexa so-and-so, or you say BMW so-and-so. How are you distinguish? I mean, you press a button. How would you distinguish between which voice system you will be using? And will there be more than two even possibly?
There are more than two already now.
But that an individual would be using more than two at the same time, potentially?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, that sounds confusing.
Well, it's up to everybody to decide which number of assistants you might be using, 0 to as many as are out there. Some prefer to use one. As a car maker, I think it is about integration, and it's about not pretending to be the solution for something which is clearly not the OEM's home turf. And so, yes, there will be a coexistence, and yes, there is a seamless handover, or no, there is no trigger word for the BMW assistant because you can choose your own trigger word.
Okay, but you'd have a separate trigger word for that than you would for Alexa or...
Well, basically, if you don't use any trigger word, then the own assistants will try to answer that question. But if you ask what's the highest mountain in the Bay Area, then it will probably hand over to Alexa, which is your preferred assistant.
I got it. Okay. So, we've talked about autonomy. It's come up a few times. And so self-driving, we assume when we hear about self-driving cars, it's generally talked about as if AI is the way we will do that. But interestingly, both of you explained that that's not really the right way to think of it. Could you start, and then Simon, you...
Yeah, so AI first of all, won't solve every problem that the world has to offer, and we don't even try to. Typically, AI will have to be combined with something that is rule-based or heuristics-based or whatever it is. And it has to be done in a manner where you don't sort of put an excessive dependence on AI, because AI also, I would say, needs to mature a little bit further in certain areas. And while that maturation is happening, what will happen is that you have a combination of some AI and maybe some rule-based, and then as time progresses and as the technology evolves, you'll find that it'll be more and more AI. I don't think, at least in the foreseeable future, it'll come to a point where it is purely AI for anything at all. So it's basically going to be a blend. But I would say, getting to autonomous driving, I mean, there are basically, I would say, two big areas of autonomous driving as to where AI would be used for autonomous. One is in what we call object detection, which is detecting pedestrians, vehicles, traffic signs, lanes, that sort of thing. The other area is essentially what we call path planning, or we actually like to call it vehicular maneuvers, where the vehicle actually executes specific maneuvers, such as a simple one is lane keeping, but other ones could be maybe making a lane change, making a turn at an intersection, things of that sort. And for the first one, we basically use an AI technology called convolutional neural networks, CNNs. And CNNs today are, it's basically, I would say, one of the more mature, I would say, technologies in AI today. The other one, which is path planning, uses a technology called reinforcement learning, which is, I would say, a little earlier in its infancy. And that has a lot of potential, but it also has, I would say, a certain amount of maturation that's still required before it goes whole hog into a car. A lot of the cars you see today, whoever they might be, BMW, Tesla, whatever it is, most of them do use CNNs in one form or the other. Not that many today use reinforcement learning, but they will over time, and that's part of the whole maturation that will happen.
Okay, so Simon, how do you think about autonomy as a ecosystem? In other words, how much self-driving are you attempting to achieve in your vehicles right now?
Well, today we are at level 2.5, so to speak, right, is what is on sale today, and it's independent of car brand, roughly. We're targeting a solid level 3 in July 2021. With
Level
the next
3
cycle.
meaning the car could take over a larger percentage of the function.
Yes, and a level 4, a mind off. So basically defined, a level 4 defined as mind off, right? And level 5 as driver off, right? So mind off capability in level 4 will be available in 2021.
I mean, you have to sit there holding the steering wheel, but you don't have to do anything.
No, you
unless
don't have to.
you
No,
hear an alarm.
mind off is even after eyes and hands off. So mind off means you can sit in the car, have your mind not associated with anything that has to do with driving. That will be available in July 2021 with the BMW brand.
For some, but not for everything you do, obviously.
No, for some road segments, especially a highway setting, that will.
So from the on-ramp to the off-ramp kind of thing.
Kind of. And so that is going to happen, definitely, and that is going to incorporate a lot of AI portions in the behavioral part. And we believe that reinforcement learning approach, and that is especially something that we do here in the Bay Area, we believe that with a reinforcement learning based approach, we can meet the expectations of the way that we are being driven is convenient. And I think that is an upside to any RL-based behavioral model rather than any deterministic or rule-based algorithms that are also under development right now.
Okay, so obviously companies like Google and Uber and Baidu are trying to get fully self-driving level 5 cars. But you said something very interesting, and unfortunately we're really pretty much out of time, but you said something very interesting about how cars are pretty much all world cars now. Basically, the cars you build to be used anywhere in the world, right? But unfortunately, the regulatory landscape is extremely fragmented. So your point was what in saying that?
Well, often there is a question, when will it be there? And the answer is, it depends on how consistent the regulatory environment is throughout the world. We will not be able to have a different path planning a component in the vehicle for a car in Pittsburgh than for a car in here, or even for a car in Europe and in the US. So at the moment, we are living in an era where we are seeing regulatory environment and legislation coming up, and we will need the most consistent, right, regulatory environments in order to speed up the delivery. We cannot afford so many variants, right, being localized.
Do you see that consistency on the horizon, or is it still pretty far off?
I'm still optimistic.
Okay. Does that sound right to you?
I think so, yeah. I think essentially there'll be more and more of the AI coming into the picture as we go along, and a lot of it is already there today, but it is to some extent bottlenecked by regulatory issues, and to some extent it is also bottlenecked by, there's always the 0.01% use case, and that 0.01%, unfortunately, if it can lead to accidents, will essentially be a barrier to adoption.
Right. There's got to be pretty much absolute reliability.
Correct.
Right. Well, thank you both so much. I wish we could have more time to continue, but it's a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vijay.